This presentation will be going over all the necessary information you will need to understand RFM's compliance policy. RFM must comply with numerous laws and regulations. The law and regulations can be broadly categorised as external and internal. The external laws and regulations include the Corporations Act of 2001, RFM's Australian Financial Services AFS licence, and ASX and NSX listing rules. The internal regulations include the RFM managed schemes, key documents, constitutions, and compliance plans, as well as RFM's internal policies. RFM's policies and procedures can be found on the intranet under the Policies and Procedures tab. Australian Securities and Investment Commission, ASIC, is RFM's most important regulator. ASIC regulates Australian companies, financial markets, financial services organisations and professionals who deal with and advise in investments, superannuation, insurance, deposit taking and credit. ASIC undertakes regular company checks. This can be done via a desktop check, written correspondence, or an actual visit to the company's premises. All RFM staff have a duty to assist ASIC in their compliance checks. RFM is also obliged to comply with the requirements of the Financial Services Council, the Australian Transaction Reports and Analysis Centre, the Australian Prudential Regulation Authority, the Australian Securities Exchange, and the National Stock Exchange for listed entities. The financial services regime was legislated by the Financial Services Reform Act of 2001 and became fully effective in March of 2004. The law stipulates that any person carrying on a financial services business is required to hold an Australian Financial Services licence. RFM is the responsible entity for 6 agricultural investment funds and holds a licence to provide product advice in relation to its products, deal in a financial product, and operate a registered managed investment scheme. RFM's Australian Financial Services Licence sets out our authorisation under the financial services regime, which includes provision of general financial product advice, dealing in a financial product, and operating registered managed investment schemes. Licence conditions include financial and audit requirements, training requirements for representatives, external dispute resolution requirement, and professional indemnity compensation requirements or insurance. Any changes to the licence authorisation can be made only with ASIC's consent. A financial product is a facility through which, or through the acquisition of which, a person makes a financial investment, manages the financial risk, or makes non-cash payments. Examples of financial products are managed investment schemes, shares, general insurance and life insurance, superannuation, cash management trusts, cheque and BPay facilities. Residential property, health insurance or margin lending are not financial products. You'll find all the details and further examples in the Compliance Staff Induction booklet. All RFM funds that are registered with ASIC, such as RFM Poultry or the Almond Fund 2006, are managed investment schemes. Once registered with ASIC, RFM as a responsible entity has a number of reporting requirements. It has to complete and lodge audited financial statements and reports, keep ASIC up to date regarding the schemes, auditors, scheme interests, constitutional changes, etc., and has to comply with the ongoing disclosure requirement, the issue of product offer documents, updates to investors in particular if concerning material issues. Financial product advice is defined in the Corporations Act as a recommendation or statement of opinion that is intended to influence a person in making a decision in relation to a financial product or could reasonably be regarded as being intended to have such influence. There are 2 types of financial product advice: personal advice and general advice. Personal advice is advice that takes into consideration one or more of the person's objectives, financial situation and needs, or a reasonable person might expect the advice to have taken one or more of these factors into account. General advice is financial product advice that is not personal advice. The definition of financial product advice does not include the provision of factual information, such as sending a product disclosure statement, a PDS, to a person upon request, answering queries on insurance premiums, cost of projects, entry/exit fees, etc. Refer to the Staff Compliance Induction for definitions and examples of both personal and general advice. Only appropriately qualified and authorised RFM representatives can give financial product advice, and only general advice can be provided. Any inquiries of this nature should be referred to one of the members of the client services team or fund administrators. All RFM staff are able to provide factual information. Product disclosure statements and supplementary product disclosure statements and the Financial Services Guide are all examples of investor related documentation. Their publication is governed by the Corporations Act. The responsibility for the issue of these documents lies primarily with the corporate services team. If you are not directly a part of this team, you may be involved by supplying financial information, developing various models, and providing other information as required. Each managed investment scheme of which RFM is the responsible entity, RE, has a constitution. This is the document binding the RE and investors and sets out how the scheme is managed. A compliance plan sets out the minimum compliance standards for meeting legislative requirements. There are other legal documents, for example, leases, agreements, loans, contract titles, etc. Changes to the scheme's constitution and compliance plans must be approved by the board. Amendments to the Constitution may also require unit holders or investors' approval. For the constitutional changes to be effective, a copy of the amendment must be lodged with ASIC. Scheme key documents can be found on the G drive under the Entity folder. For example, RFP can be found under RFM Corporate Key Documents. RFM compliance framework includes the RFM board, compliance committees, internal unit pricing audit, scheme constitutions and compliance plans, internal policies and procedures, identification and implementation of compliance requirements, reporting by the board or committees of the rectification of issues and breaches, ongoing education and training, automated assurance systems, for example, ticket, and external audit. RFM's compliance and risk management program ensures we are meeting our obligations under the Corporations Act, our AFS license, and that we meet certain ASIC requirements for managed investment schemes and companies. The compliance framework and RFM's adherence to it are audited annually by the compliance plan auditor, PricewaterhouseCoopers. The board of directors comprises of 3 external directors, Guy Painter, the chairman, Mike Carroll, and Julian Widdop. The board also has 1 executive director, David Bryant. The RFM board meets monthly. It is responsible for setting the direction, strategies, and financial objectives for RFM and monitoring the implementation of these strategies and financial objectives, reviewing fund financial accounts and performance, monitoring compliance with regulatory requirements, ethical standards, and external commitments, and appointing and reviewing the performance of the managing director and company secretary. The board must also review all conflicts of interest and approve all related party transactions, for example, a transaction that involves RFM in its own capacity and RFM as responsible entity of one of its managed schemes. Monthly reports to the board include RFM and scheme reports, financial data, HR and HSE reports, unit pricing report, fund management report, and compliance and risk reports. RFM has an internal compliance committee comprised of several corporate employees. From time to time, other employees may be included in the committee by invitation. The ICC meets quarterly and is responsible for monitoring compliance with RFM's Australian Financial Services AFS licence and other relevant legislation and regulations, continual improvement of compliance systems, review of risks across all funds and operations, and promoting an internal culture of compliance. The ICC reports to the RFM board. The risk management plan covers corporate risks, business continuity, and AML/CTF. It is managed by the Internal Compliance Committee, which reports directly to the board. The appointed AML/CTF compliance officer, this is currently the Assistant Company Secretary and Compliance Manager, is responsible for compliance with the relevant legislation, AML/CTF Act of 2006, and reporting to AUSTRAC. Health, safety and environment is overseen by the National HSE Committee. All staff must familiarise themselves with compliance policies and their application, and other policies as they apply in their business areas, such as finance and accounting, client services, IT. The board must approve certain company policies, such as the conflict of interest management policy and subsequent changes. For further reference, additional detail and definitions, please refer to the RFM Staff Compliance Induction booklet. If you have any questions, please contact or see the Compliance Officer, Sandra McBride. This concludes your induction.